Hey, this is Jay.
And this is Chelsea.
Welcome to the Shifting Perceptions podcast.
We are bringing you inspiration to live a more creative lifestyle because our favorite people are the ones that choose the path less traveled. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of the Shifting Perceptions podcast. This is Chelsea Alders. This week we sat down with Australian-born musician Ben Lee, which, if you don't know him from songs like Catch My Disease or Ache for You from his album Awake is the New Sleep, you may know him from soundtracks like Grey's Anatomy or the movie Just Friends. He also has contributed to the musical score on his wife's newest show, Camping, on HBO, and is currently touring with the one and only Josh Radnor, aka Ted, from How I Met Your Mother. In this interview, we dive into all things Ben Lee and the life of a musician that is in it for the long haul. His view of "my best years are yet to come" will keep you engaged and in love with his attitude towards the industry. This interview will give you some great takeaways on what you can do in your own creativity to keep it exciting. Listening to Ben's shifts through acting and collaborations with people like Lena Dunham and his new B is for Beer musical with Tom Robbins is so inspiring, and I hope you love every minute.
One more quick thing before we get to the conversation with Ben Lee. I wanted to let you know that at the very end of this episode, Chelsea and I have a little dialogue between us, a little candid conversation, talking about some of the highlights from the interview, some of the things that we felt were, significant takeaways, some of the things that kept us thinking long after the interview was over. We hit a lot of really important topics, a lot of really intriguing subject matter, and if you're interested in our thoughts, listen in to the very end. And also, if you guys can click subscribe on your podcast app while you're listening, that'll make sure you don't miss any episode coming up. It'll give you a little reminder. So let's get to it. Hey, Ben, thanks for joining us on the show. We're extremely excited to have you on and talk to you about a whole slew of things.
Well, thank you for having me, guys.
So we really spent so much time today kind of going back and forth on how we wanted to start this interview, because you have a whole lot of interests that are kind of co-interests for us, and there's so much. But I want to start with the music, because I think that, that's why we know who you are. And that's, you came into our lives actually as a couple 12 years ago, and we were both huge fans. Yeah. So I think that's the story I want to hear. So where did that start for you? Do you come from a musical family? I know you started very young playing music, but tell us where the magic started.
Well, my music, I do have a musical family, but it was sort of dormant by the time it got to my generation. Meaning there'd been, I'd had a lot of musicians back a few generations when my family was in Russia, and gypsy violinists and all this sort of thing.
Ooh, that's cool.
I think by the time it got to us, I think with a lot of immigration, a lot of what happens is families get very focused on providing a better future and, getting an education, all that. And some of the arts got a little lost,
Right.
So yeah, it just sort of got a bit, but there was a sense that I was meant to do a mandatory, it was to be a well-rounded person, you should do a mandatory 2 years of piano. That was sort of just so I started doing it, and I don't know, what music, it's hard to describe. I mean, I take it so for granted in terms of the way music touched me in my life. But I just found it fascinating. I loved it. I thought the idea of being a musician and performer, it just, from a very, very young age, I just found it an incredibly compelling prospect. So I started a band when I was 13 or something, 14. And, it kind of went from there.
That's awesome. Well, so was it more that picturesque, I'm going to be a rock star that you saw? Or was it the minute you touched those instruments, you felt I know what to do with this? Which side of it spoke to you?
I think I understood it from a singing perspective first. I'm not the world's greatest singer, but I have a tone to my voice that it made me happy to sing from a very young age, and it seemed to make other people happy. Just in a very not like a kid on America's Got Talent singing.
It's a different
Frank
world
Sinatra,
now.
Celine Dion, just in a way that, like, I don't know, it seemed to make people smile when I sang, and I realized that very young. And then, of course, yeah, all the stuff that it looks very fun to be a rock star and all that. But yeah, it was really, in the beginning, there was sort of this like very just raw connection to playing music, to what music meant, to singing it, and everything came after that.
So in the beginning, it was punk rock, right?
Well, for me, yeah. I mean, the great thing about volume is you can do, my songs in a way were always sort of accessible and, pop, I guess, in a way. But the thing about volume and distortion is they're very transformative. Like if you do something that would otherwise be gentle, very loud, it automatically just becomes aggressive in a way. So I was very intrigued by sort of beautiful melodies and harmony and stuff like that, but doing it loud and aggressively. And it just felt like the best of all possible scenarios.
Oh, so that's interesting. So do you feel like you actually kind of continued writing the same way, but it was more like the way that you projected it that changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the great thing about leaning on volume and energy and stuff is that it's, your craft and your relationship to your skill set does not need to be as refined. Volume compensates for a lot. So punk is great music to begin when you first learn instruments, because a lot of what you lack in technique you make up for in attitude.
Yeah.
So Ben, your music is like, it's interwoven with narratives and analogies and messages. At what point in your life and in your musical explorations did you realize that the power of the messages behind your music that you were writing?
Well, it probably came before writing music. It was listening to music. Like I think I remember hearing that George Michael song, "Praying for Time."
Okay.
In the wounded skies above, say it's much too late. Maybe we should all be playing. It stood out like a sore thumb on the radio, and I began to notice songs where the lyrics were taken seriously. And it felt like there was an actual effort to communicate something more than just being almost like an MC role, like someone going, "Hey, let's party, and here's the groove." It was just a different type of thing. So, and then getting into punk and bands like Fugazi and stuff, where there was often a very strong political or moral agenda and a sense that there was like a fight that needed to be fought. I think it lent itself to, I came at it more from a confessional perspective, meaning, can I use this music thing, this songwriting thing, to externalize my internal thoughts and feelings? And maybe that's a way of not feeling as alone in the world. It's quite remarkable just what happens when you share where you're at.
Yeah.
And these things, life's very weird because, these things, once you do them for a certain amount of years and you build up these synaptic connections, I've externalized through art my internal dialogue for more years than I haven't now.
Right.
So it's simply the way things are. Like when I change, I seek to express it in song or in tone or in rhythm. So it's just, I don't know, it's become like a muscle almost.
Yeah, I mean, that's very relatable over here. So Jay is an artist, and I find that just in watching him for the past 14 years, whenever there's a big shift in our life, that's how it's expressed for sure. Yeah. But I also think you're right. That is something that when you've been doing art or music for so long, you probably do take it for granted. Because for me, like, I don't have an outlet like music or art, and I wish I could properly express outside of stick figures and drums what that
Well,
means.
it's a funny thing, because it's like, I would say it's like a mixed blessing in this world to be of an artistic temperament, because the reality is people that are really artists, they can't not be.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult. It can be difficult in terms of how that fits into the world that we live in and the socioeconomic model and what's valued in our community. But I see it, I see it with people, how it begins as a, it feels like, oh, it's just a hobby. And there's all kinds of like rationales that go on.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, there's like a point of no return where it just takes you and you've got to roll with it. So it's interesting.
I was going to ask you, Ben, so for me with my artwork, it was definitely like one of my earlier coping mechanisms, like dealing with life and whatnot. My mom has like bipolar, and growing up like with a mother that has such suffering was really hard. Just various things in my life made me feel a little bit different and whatnot. And I used my art to cope. And later on, I found success just through repetition and seeing where it could take me. I think a lot of artists have some version of a struggle in their past that pushed them into the arts. And I'm wondering if your music started out as a coping mechanism for you as well.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, because that's sort of the beauty of coping mechanisms, that they are, you fall into them in a way that is seemingly quite organic. You don't realize until years later that something was a coping mechanism often.
Yeah.
That's a tricky one. I've thought a lot about the various factors in my life, including the time that I was born into. Musically, there was, for someone that had energy and attitude and wanted to make stuff on their own outside of the mainstream it was a fortuitous moment, because there was a shift to like independent music and home recording and stuff. And it was acceptable for me to not be amazing at my instrument, but to have a great attitude and to have a great mindset, to have chutzpah,
Right. Yeah.
I wonder, had I been born 20 years earlier, that would have been a very different cultural climate and what that would have meant for my creative development. So that's to say that all of these factors, including like the family we come from, and it's nice to be able to kind of reason it out, but I can never tell exactly why anything's happened the way it's happened. And sometimes I think it's sort of not that important, because if there's any issues that have to be faced in your own sort of psychology and stuff, it seems that they appear multiple times in your life, and there'll be a chance to face that again with a new understanding. You don't have to kind of totally understand the past. You can relearn the lesson in present time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I actually want to talk about the Australia thing just briefly, because we had our dear friend Will Connor on here. He's from Byron Bay, Australia, and he talked a lot about what that meant for him in his career. And what was interesting is that he always said, coming from Australia, it was almost like you were taught to not be like a braggart or like talk about
tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah, tall poppy syndrome. And so it's interesting because I want to hear, I feel like you're very humble also, but how have you coped with that? Like, was that your experience too? Or did you just go with the rock and roll, punk rock, like I'm getting out there?
Oh no, for me, it was almost like, like in Footloose, there's a town where no dancing's allowed.
Yes.
For me, it was like being from a country where no bravado was allowed. It seemed to suck the life out of what you can do as an artist, particularly as a young artist. Bravado is important.
Yeah.
It's sort of how you get it done.
And
like,
the confidence, right?
Yeah, but not even real confidence. It's just swagger.
Yeah.
It's like how much you can pretend to be confident.
Right.
Is how much impact you're going to have, basically. And so for me, that was a big challenge, and I really tried to rock the boat as much as I could, like just by example. Like, I think when you're young, like saying things that are outrageous and that go against the social mores and convention, that sort of thing is very enticing and very fun. But it later, I think what I realized is that everything has its pros and cons. And while, yes, Australia has to some degree a desire to cut down its successful people, it also has a value system that is not entirely dependent on career performance.
Right.
Quality of life is really important. And, I'd say every culture has an upside and a downside to their national identity.
Yeah. So I feel like, that's one of those things that, even just being in the US, I feel like we have that side of us that's a little bit, it gets pulled away from, okay, our humble beginnings in a way. I don't know. It's interesting. But okay, so let's shift. I want to talk to you a little bit about where you are with your craft right now, since there have been so many changes and turns. And now, we were listening to your ayahuasca tracks today and going in all sorts of fun directions. So what is it now what's your favorite form of creativity? You're doing so many things. I know you're touring again, and talk about now.
Yeah, I think a big theme in my life the last few years has been collaboration. And I used to like to almost like to dominate my collaborators. Like, I like to work with people with less confidence and less experience and get them to do what I wanted them to do.
You consciously realize that.
Yeah, like collaboration for me was more about how do I get my way and get other people to do what I want. And I think there's been just an evolution of increasingly wanting to work with people at a higher and higher level and being more and more open to their insights. And so there's been a lot of collaborations. I have this band Radnor and Lee with Josh Radnor. We did a musical with Tom Robbins. I produced Jill Sobiel's album. I've been doing stuff with Lena Dunham. These are all very collaborative relationships with people I respect. And so it's really nice to, and again, that's not to put down any of my past collaborators. It was just like, I wasn't ready. I wasn't mature enough. You know what I mean? I was like a guy on cocaine, just thinking about what I was going to say next while they were talking.
Yeah.
So yeah. And the great thing about collaboration is in a way, it allows for more magic to occur because you can get more surprises.
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you with these collaborations. So, I was looking in the Josh Radnor thing is awesome. I saw you worked with Zooey Deschanel and Ben Folds. You've done like a lot throughout the years, but with all these people and, big, small, artistic, not artistic, has there been anyone you sat next to and watched their creative process and you were like,
sorry, let me decline my mother's FaceTime call.
She can hop on.
I just got a new computer. I don't know how to disable that FaceTime coming in. If that comes again, that's just my mom.
Okay.
No worries.
As Jewish mothers love to do.
Yes, and then she'll probably call 15 more times if I know Jewish mothers well.
Has there been anyone who what?
Whose creative process really just blew your mind? Like, not just like, oh, I'm in the room with Lena Dunham, which is amazing, but like someone that you just watched and you were like, wow, this is a way of doing this that I've never witnessed before.
Yeah. All of them, but because that's really fundamental to having gratitude for the collaboration. Whatever it is being grateful for the fact that there is an independent psyche in front of you that will find a different solution to the problem. Lena is someone who I find her mind fascinating. A lot of people I think she's very misunderstood and also sometimes deliberately misunderstood.
Yeah.
Right.
And I relate to that too. Like I said, that urge to provoke and stir the pot.
Yeah.
But ultimately her intelligence is startling to me. I really trust it. Tom Robbins is like, it's different with him because, he's 87 now, and what you get collaborating and working and having a friendship with someone in that point of their life is very different than collaborating with someone your own age or younger. Or I got a sense from him. I partly gathered like a vision of what's possible, of a way to age as an artist and to stay spontaneous and open. And I was very in awe of that because my family, like I said, like that shift, I think that happened with, immigrating to Australia a couple generations ago and becoming, going to university and doing all those things, becoming professionals. The choice was to move away from some of that artistic gypsy blood,
Right. And seeing elders doing that is almost like, whoa, this can be done.
Yeah. And so like I've had to I didn't have in a way an artistic parent, that could it's like you have the birds and the bees conversation. Artists need a whole bunch of other conversations.
Yeah.
True.
I have them with my daughter. Like when she does a drawing and her friend criticizes it or her teacher doesn't like something, I explain to her how many times this is going to happen in her life. These are things that artists talk about, So anyway, that is to say that collaborating with Tom was sort of expanding on this whole other level to do with appreciating my own mortality and realizing how long the journey is and how juicy it can be and how you can just get better and more open and more spontaneous. And yeah, it's amazing.
So Ben, we were listening to your 2016 talk. You had a talk about thinking outside of the box, and it really connected with it because you spoke about entering and leaving different systems. You were talking about how everything's sort of a system, like a family and religion and political systems and whatnot. And what really moved me on it was the idea of leaving a system and not forgetting to steal the gold, you called it.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, since you've seemed to have been through so many systems, you've done a lot of self-improvement work and a lot of studying in various modalities. I'm wondering which systems you've been through that have impacted you the most, and if you can give us if you could share some of that gold with us that you've taken with you along the way.
I mean, in a way, I don't like to praise or give credit to systems because I think that might lead someone else to go into them, and they're like spiders' webs. I don't want to encourage people to get everyone's going to get lost in their own systems that they're attracted to, but I don't want to really karmically play a role in someone getting stuck in the next part of their journey in some, formula. And the other thing about it is that essentially those systems have also stolen gold. That gold doesn't belong to them. The real wisdom that you find in a system is universal gold. It doesn't belong to the system. The system didn't invent it. You know what I mean? Look at all these different meditation systems. They all act as if they created meditation. But it's not even possible. Meditation doesn't even have a definition. It's sort of something that we innately know how to do somehow as a species. And they've all packaged it in different ways. And that's fine if you go into one of those systems and you learn meditation. But there is a fundamental lie within each of these systems, which is that you can only get that gold there and that they own it and they're the originator of it. So I suppose the greatest lesson I've had overall in my journey of exploring who I am and spirituality and psychology and all of that has to do with how real a lie can feel. Because all of these illusions, when I was in them, they felt like the truth.
Right.
And I remember seeing like a TED talk about this. I can't remember. I think it was called About Being Wrong or Being Right or something. And the woman used the analogy of like, in cartoons, when the character runs off a cliff and it keeps running for like 10 seconds before it realizes it's in the air. And then when it realizes it falls.
Yeah.
And what she was saying is being wrong feels exactly like being right. And all of this journeying, in some ways, it's like, it's made me like more skeptical, but not in a way that's like cynical. Okay. More skeptical in that I refuse to compromise on what I know to be like my highest ideal. Based on someone else's narrative. So like it's like I'm less trusting of, like, anytime someone tells me they've like, oh, you've got to read this book, or you've got to take this course, or you've got to go see this healer, I'm like, I left 20 minutes ago. You know what I mean? Like the evangelical nature of people's relationship to their spiritual journey is like, I'm incredibly distrustful of it. But I'm not distrustful because I don't believe there's beautiful, huge experiences. I just refuse to experience them through someone else's eyes. I've just got more confidence. Like I have my own. I heard a great story about, Baz Luhrmann, the director. He did like a Great Gatsby and Romeo.
Oh, okay,
right, yeah.
Yeah, and he was having dinner with Lars von Trier, who did Breaking the Waves and all that. And Lars von Trier was really into this thing called Dogma for a while, which was this set of cinematic rules. You can't use any artificial light. You can't have any artificial violence.
Right.
All this kind of stuff. And he said, Baz, I challenge you to make a Dogma film. And Baz said, oh, Lars, I've got my own dogma. And I loved that story because it was the voice of an artist who is going down a path.
Right.
And they're not going to be turned away from it.
So how does that affect you as being a role model to others, though? So are you still confident in being like, this was my journey and I urge you to research it, or are you just like, go find your own way? Like, what's your path?
I mean, I honestly don't think I found anything. like I found disillusionment with enough of other people's answers to begin to trust my own more.
To turn to in. So that's the answer.
Yeah. But so like, I couldn't really like recommend anyone to copy my path because I think you'd be wasting your time. Like I say this to Josh about my guitar playing because he likes my guitar playing. And I was like, oh, there's far more efficient ways to get where I got than the way I went. I think I wasted a lot of energy and time. The only thing is that the flip side of that is I do think effort counts for something. Mm-hmm. And you can if you go full tilt in the wrong direction, you still get some benefit from it.
Yeah.
Because like, it's almost like you burn through your own resistance to hard work, mm-hmm. and you humble yourself and you do a lot of things, even doing the wrong thing, that are sort of good for you. You take it seriously.
So does your creative process reflect that? Because like what you just described, I relate a lot to like painting. So like, let's say I look at one of my finished paintings, I could say, well, that looks pretty freaking easy. I could paint it, let's say. But, and I'm not reflecting upon the weeks or months of parts of the painting that I painted over and painted over and painted over and made mistakes. All the struggles and all the indirect routes to get to that finish line, like with your guitar playing, you were comparing it to. Is writing a song typically that process where you're kind of going in not even close to a straight line, but just all over the place? Or do your songs more kind of come to you in almost like a glimpse of a finished version of it?
I mean, it can be any of those things, but I think what you would relate to and what most artists relate to is like, once I've completed the creation of them, there's very little to think about or be said about it. It was a process to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to make. So yes, if I were to look back and go, oh, interesting how I got from here to there to there to there, I don't know what use that would be. Like, I'd rather put my energy into the next step I'm going to take forward.
So you're not creating an ongoing formula. You're just like, let's just move forward. And
I mean, it happens inevitably. Like you learn a technique and then you apply it but I like the sort of, I like the way when you do a craft kind of seriously, like every day, that stuff is all osmosis. Like, you just do it and you get better at it.
Right.
You might not even, maybe like one night if you get a little stoned or something, you might realize how much better you've gotten. You know what I mean? Like, if you like get out of a different mindset, you go like, whoa, I'm learning a lot, you know. But in a general state, you're sort of just moving forward and practicing. And you keep, you know, I always talk about, it's always practicing the thing you're not good at.
Right.
So in a way, if you're serious about improving yourself as an artist, or it's like you're always just looking at the things you can't do. And that's how you get better. You just practice those over and over, and then they change. And
that was actually my next question is like, is there anything in the like, what is it that you're actually scared, like terrified of in the creative process? Is there something that every time you're like moving towards, a wall goes up? Like, do you have any of those around you?
Yeah, it's not like I feel it emotionally, but I see it in my abilities. Like, there's certain fantasies I have of technical proficiency that even though I like incrementally improve, I don't seem to be able to cross these sort of major thresholds. But it reminds me of, you know, that story, there's like an old folk story about a piano student who went to the piano teacher at his first lesson, and he said, I've been practicing, but it doesn't sound as good coming out my fingers as it does in my mind.
Right.
And the teacher said, what makes you think that ever changes? So I'm sort of aware that, like, in a way, I'll never approach the beauty of what my mind can conceptualize musically.
Right.
And in a way, I feel like hopeless because my skill level feels so low, but I'm also like just reasonable enough to go, I think everyone sort of feels like that. Even people like, say, like Rufus Wainwright, who has like his incredible singing voice and grasp of
God, what is he doing? I haven't heard that name in a long time.
He's great. He's written a couple operas. I mean, he seems to have the technical skill to be able to do what he wants to do, you know? But still, it's like, that's the journey of being an artist. Like, you can't touch the thing that's so perfect that's in your mind.
I think what I'm baffled by still is that you were talking about how if someone was almost like evangelical or almost so pumped up on something that's kind of what you would run from, yet like looking into like your interests and some of your other interviews, like you're very passionate about a lot of things, and it, like, you know, from an outside perspective looking in, things like holistic health or like essential oils or like meditation ceremonies and ayahuasca and other types of things, you seem so passionate about excuse me, that it does seem like you're saying this shit's freaking awesome, check it out.
Yeah, but you got to remember, like, this is a new moment where we're talking to each other right now.
Right.
Those are things that maybe happened yesterday or a month ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. Today, I feel how I feel.
Yeah,
okay, fair enough. That's cool.
Not that there isn't value in all these things. I've just learnt the hard way about the dangers of being evangelical in every sense, like musically, you know, spiritually, everything. It's like, I just don't think it works. Like, it's a red flag.
So what does work in your current right now, Ben, mindset. If there's something that you're particularly passionate about, or using this platform that you've built for good, and you really genuinely want to change the world in some way, shape, or form with your music and with your ideas, and what would be the way that you think would most effectively get that message out there?
Well, something I try and do is, whether it's through like an Instagram post or whatever it is, I try and share positivity. I try and share happiness. I try not to share from a place of despair or, like I think all these little artistic kingdoms that we're each creating in our own mini social media empires that we each have in our lives, whether we're
Well
public
said.
or not, is built on what is our vision. And I've had a lot of people say to me, who I don't even know if they like my music, but they're like, I really like following you and your family on Instagram. Because I think I try and be positive. I don't know. I don't think there's anything that much more, anything mysterious to it.
Yeah.
But truly, where I'm at right now is trying to dig in to my own uniqueness. And it really, I mean, this is the same as my experience with psychedelics, like art and psychedelics and love and sex. Like ultimately, they all have shown me quite similar lessons in that what I have to offer that is uniquely mine requires me to embrace my individuality. And I'm just trying to do that more. And there's no formula for that or no recipe for that. But when I make decisions, what I say yes to, what I say no to, I'm trying to do it more from a place of authentically what feels like me.
So
you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
well, that's
totally.
actually what I wanted to ask. So with, you're still performing. I know you're going on tour with Josh coming up, right? I think there's another tour coming up, and you're doing a lot of other like public speaking and all that. Where's the place that you thrive right now? Like, is it on stage, or is it when you're writing, or is it just family? Like, what is the thing that you're like, oh my gosh, I just can't wait until this?
Well, something that's always been important to me is to have like a through line that was real through all these areas of my life. So I've always very much tried to be the same person with the same value system in like my work. I'm sure my work in a way is better than who I am as a person, in some ways, but in some ways not. So meaning that I've never been that attached to the medium. Like, I acted in a movie, I've scored a TV show, I've produced records, I've written, I've songwritten, I've performed. I don't have such an intense preference for one over another.
Okay.
If I can be authentic and feel like who I am in it, I enjoy it. And a lot of it depends on timing, like what opportunities present themselves. I think one of the reasons I've had a long career is because I've been able to see opportunity. And the ability to see opportunity has to do with the ability to let go of the way you thought something was going to look.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's so relatable so many of our listeners on this podcast are creatives and a lot of people that are shifting into new spaces. And so talking about like a little bit of that, I know you've had a lot of big shifts, but what are the things like, I know that music can take these interesting turns within ourselves. Do you have times in your history where you're like, I was playing this type of music, but I don't enjoy that anymore, and I really want to give this to the world, and you felt these really major shifts in your career?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I still feel it. Like I get inspired by new styles or new ideas, but when I was younger, it was like really strong. Like it shifted all the time.
Yeah.
But that's also, I think when you're younger, you're more connected to like what's happening at a sort of trend level, I guess, culturally. And, now I still follow these threads. Like it's like following an adventure.
Right.
But but I don't do it with the same. I look to integrate it into what I'm doing rather than like throwing out the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, I find that's probably the best. I mean, I know Jay and I talk about it a lot because there's certain genres that maybe his art spoke to people in certain ways. Like he was a surf art, like he was really known as a surf artist when he was painting all sorts of different genres. But then it sort of was like almost uncomfortable for his fan base to be like, why are you going to paint anything but surfing? Like it was like,
yeah. Did you feel like pressured when you had like such huge success with like Awake is the New Sleep? Did you feel like a sense of pressure or a sense of like expectation come over you, like that your fans wanted to have that version of Ben Lee keep going on and on?
Yeah, I've definitely felt that at several points of my career. But what's funny is like the thing that got rid of that was, you know, I started as like this like indie acoustic kind of thing. But then my first big hit was this song Cigarettes Will Kill You, which was all electronic. And so that already I was like, oh, okay. And then my next big hit was Catch My Disease, which was sort of more like acoustic pop, folky type thing.
yeah.
And I sort of realized like, hang on, at that point I was only 10 years into my career. And I'd already seen that there were various incarnations stylistically that people could accept from me,
Right.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I realized was that, and I started seeing like at my shows, it wasn't like, you know, there's some artists where you go and you like desperately want to hear one song.
Yeah.
Right.
I sort of started realizing my audiences weren't like that. Like they wanted me to show up and be present. And when I'm present, I'm entertaining and I'm funny and I'm musical and I do my thing. And they kind of wanted me to do what I wanted to do and they enjoyed it. So I felt very lucky in that sense that part of the lesson I learned was that like you didn't really have to pander in terms of material or style. You just had to be really present and show up and then the audience would be quite happy.
So I can speak to that, Ben, because I actually, and we've been to many, many, many concerts, but I remember very clearly your concert, and I felt that way because I love lyrics and I love stories, and like that's really, I want to hear every word. Like if I'm at a show where I can't hear changes to lyrics or something like that, then I'm not enjoying myself. And you changed some lyrics for fun, which I loved, but then I actually remember you do you remember he was like on stage, but then you were like, here's what's going to happen is that normally I would like leave.
Yeah, and then come back.
and then I'd come back.
And then you'll cheer for me.
Thing, you'll cheer. And he's like, and you're like, so how about we just cheer now? Can we just do that? And it was like, you played all new stuff that night. And I remember loving every second of it, which I am one of those people that I usually like to hear I want my songs that, you know, I like to sing along to.
I mean, I get that. And part of the reason is that most live rock music is not designed for a first-time listener.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like really loud. You can't hear the lyrics. It's designed to like you're hearing an album played back. But that's what I always liked about folk music and like Jonathan Richman and like folk music you can listen to right away and get it because you can hear the words. They bring you in. It's for everybody,
yeah.
You know? And that I always sort of liked that idea for a show that it should be someone singing you songs that whether you've heard them a million times or not at all, you should have the same opportunity to connect with them.
Yes, I completely agree. And that is something very unique to folk. You're right. It's something very, I don't know.
Ben, do you feel like you are you like the same person when you're on stage as when you're writing? Do you feel like there's different entities almost coming through you? Are you more comfortable one over the other?
I mean, there's sort of, you know, like performing, it's hard to describe. Like music has this shamanic quality that the ability to play, like once you've played live music enough that you can actually lose yourself on stage, something else starts to happen. And that, I don't know when that started for me, but I'd say it was probably in my early 20s that I could like truly get into it. You know what I mean? Like as opposed to thinking like, how do I look? People, you know what I mean? Like,
am I doing a good guitar face?
Is it going well? What did you know? All that. And then once you can lose yourself in the music, it's different every time.
Yeah.
You don't know what it's going to be like.
So how did this relationship with Josh come about?
Well, just through being friends, and I think I admired his, like, he's a real doer. Like, he gets things done. When he wanted to direct a movie, he raised the money. He made 2 movies. He's written plays. He's obviously done all his acting, and I like working with people that are just like get it done type people.
Yeah.
And I liked how his mind worked. So we just tried it. And I was, it was just writing a song. It wasn't meant to be a big deal, but it was good.
Yeah.
And so we wrote another one, and we were like, why don't we make a little sort of recording or something? And it was just incredibly organic. And it's funny because I'm 40 now, and you don't normally like start your first like proper band when you're 40 or 39. It's sort of late. But again, this ties back to coming back to like my collaboration. I don't know if I was ready. I was more ready to get married than I was to be in a band.
It says a lot.
I'd like to dive back into creative process a little bit. So do you find that like the lyrics and the music sort of come when you want them to, or do you find that sometimes you have a message or some lyrics that are just sort of waiting around for a while for music to kind of unite with them? Like how does that work?
I mean, it's like, I think of creative inspiration a lot like it's like a seduction. Like you have this creative muse, or this spirit that like, you get into it sometimes, you can feel it. But you also can't be too desperate, and you're not its slave. You know what I mean? It's like a mutual respect. And I do think after enough years of developing this dialogue with my creativity, it shows up for me because also like, I think it knows that I'm going to do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's like that book, Big Magic. Have you read that?
I haven't.
It's really great. She kind of talks about that, how ideas are sort of entities that come looking for collaborators. And when you acknowledge and agree, like, yeah, let's play together, let's do something. The ideas know when you're ready and when you're not. And if you're not and you say, no, thank you, they'll go on to someone else who is ready.
Yeah, and it's similar with sort of sports. Like, if you push your body, but you also look after yourself, your body opens and tries new things because it feels like you have a trust with your body.
Right.
So it's just trust. And that is like a journey that I think in some ways I'm just starting. Like I'm starting to trust myself in ways that are new for me.
Do you find that you like consciously push yourself into like very uncomfortable zones with your creativity? Like if you have a certain set of riffs or certain chord structures that you're more comfortable with, or certain ways of phrasing lyrics, do you find yourself like kind of pushing yourself into really uncomfortable areas just to see if you can do it still?
I think so. Like, yeah, I mean, even just, sometimes what's old is refreshing too, but yeah, I'm always trying to stretch. I definitely have to stretch myself. I want to. I find it satisfying to just be getting better and trying to lift myself.
So we are big believers here in just, in just manifestation and, creating our own destiny and whatever you should call it. But is there anything that is in your story right now that you're like, oh, when I was a kid or when I was in my 20s, like I envisioned this and I knew it was going to happen? Like, do you have any of those like very clear?
I mean, just one that sort of happened recently was, I did this, I did the score for this HBO show Camping that my wife was on, and I'd never done it before. And I was going into my agency a few months ago, and I met the guy who books the TV composers. And he's like, hey, do you remember we met like 5 years ago? And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot. We did. And he said, yeah, and I asked you if you'd ever want to do TV. And you said, I'll do it, but I'll only do it if someone comes to me and really wants me to do it and I'm the right person. And I don't want to be in like a cattle call, and I don't want to like compete for it. But yeah. And he's like, and that's exactly what happened within 5 years. So there is something about having a very relaxed but intentional attitude with things. Like a mixture of being relaxed and being focused. It sort of seems a little bit like I don't think there's any blanket rules, but it seems like you start moving into the inevitability a little bit when you can be both calm and ambitious.
Yeah, I feel like that's relatable too. That's a good takeaway for our listeners, because sometimes it's like finding that balance of, I want to make my next moves and I want to take chances and I want to put myself out there, but sometimes it comes across as like, I mean, I don't want to say like desperation, but it's like that like almost anxiety driven aggression kind of.
Well, you know what's weird too, like in music, you realize how, in the music industry, I should say, you realize how few people sort of stay focused on playing the long game.
Yeah.
Everyone wants everything they're doing to be immediately successful. And I don't know, where I'm at with my career, I just realized like the entire thing has been a long game. Even if there's been these little peak moments where I've had a song that's done well or something, that hasn't really been an end to any kind of journey. It's basically just financed the next year or two.
Yeah.
But the longer game is to be peaking in my 70s and 80s as a creative person. I really feel that. I don't see, and especially after working with Tom, I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be true. Like if that's the image I hold in my mind, that I just want to get better and better, and in the last third of my life really be doing my greatest work with the most wisdom about who I am and about what the world's like and what love is and how to be kind and how to collaborate. Like, I don't know. I think it's possible. Yeah.
Have there been how good are you at predicting how well your projects are going to turn out? Like, have there been?
I'm terrible because I hope everyone's going to turn out really well. So, like every single project, I think, oh, this is going to everyone's going to love this. Yeah.
That's comforting, actually.
That's nice to hear that. What was like? Has there been a moment? I guess I assume there is, but I don't want to assume anything. Was there a moment when you're like, "Fucking A, I made it"?
I mean, like. You know, there are little moments like that. There's this story I've been telling recently. Just, you know, I had this moment in the studio maybe it was a year ago, even with a collaborator. We were working on something, and he was asking me about the label I was working with at that time. And I said, "Oh, they're good. I mean, it's not like they're going to break me or anything, but they're like really good." And he's like, "Haven't you already broken?" And the story was interesting because it made me realize from his perspective, I was behind the velvet rope of successful people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I perceive other people as being behind that rope and that I want to get back there. And there are moments like that where I go, I mean, increasingly, I feel like, you know, I've been a professional musician for over a quarter of a century, and my work may not be like occupy the same space for young people as it did, but I'm still working with I'm working with better people than I've ever worked with. And I'm like working on I'm trying to solve more complex problems than I've ever tried to solve.
Isn't that interesting though? We're all just trying to like level up. Like that's really,
exactly.
Where you are.
So that's the thing. I think increasingly I just feel like, oh, I kind of did it. Like, what I really wanted, I mean, I'd like more money. I think that's pretty common. But I think ultimately, like, I wanted to work with brilliant people and make music with brilliant people. And I've gotten to do that. And I get to do it for my living. So I do feel like I more live on a day-to-day level of like having quote unquote made it than I used to.
Speaking about like money and success, like a lot of creative people that I come across, artists, have this like really tough time like reconciling creativity with business. And like I heard you say something in an interview that I really believe in as well, is that business and art are basically the same thing. Now I have to preface this by saying this was like an interview I heard with Ben Lee a year ago. So
yeah. No, but I do think that. I think that like business, you have to be creative to be good at business.
Yeah.
And part of creativity is the sharing of your creativity, and that includes the selling of it. that anyone who has affected the world in a big way has been able to sell an idea. Whether that's Mozart selling an idea to his patrons that it was worth the investment of, or, the architect who designed the Sydney Opera House, or, Gandhi selling the idea of freedom from the British with a hunger strike. Like, these are all, they're all to do with communication, which is sales, essentially. So I think, like, if, for me, in the areas I find that I'm not confident in my ability to sell myself or my talent, or I often see there's actually a gap there in my self-belief. It's like the creativity isn't complete.
Right. So my next question with that is, what do you think? Is it a cultural thing in our culture? Like, what is it that creatives are so ashamed of selling themselves for? Like, where did that come from, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard different theories about it. But ultimately, what I see with my community and friends is there's this sort of like love-hate relationship with money. Perhaps that comes from childhood, like being in families where, like, I would see my dad like, oh, the mortgage, and like you talk about other people that have money with a mixture of envy and disdain.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we grew up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's almost like you grow up getting really mixed messages about, is money a good thing to have or a bad thing to have? And politically, like, oh, the people that have money make the bad political decisions. And the people that don't have money are noble, but they need money, and it's extremely confusing. So I just look at it as like another playground to kind of refine myself in and be clearer about what my value is and what I want to attract in my life.
So I'm really fascinated by your pursuit of consciousness. Now I know you're not into like proclaiming any one particular modality over another, but for someone listening in that might be curious about, tapping into higher levels of consciousness, are there modalities, methods, practices, rituals, anything of the sort that you'd be willing to share, whether it's psychedelics or a meditation, or how might you gear someone towards that direction?
I mean, they all have their place. I think more importantly, more interestingly, is, are you willing to follow the clues in your own life? Because take psychedelics, for instance, that's not for everybody. And the idea that you could just prescribe something across the board to have a sort of mind-expanding experience, it just doesn't always work. And even meditation, or all those kind of things, they're like, you have to be very willing to try and find. And I'm on that journey too, of figuring out, like, wow, what do I need today? What does today look like? But I don't have a recipe. I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, the absence of a recipe is perhaps, I like being married. Maybe get married.
That's a good one.
I mean, I think like getting married has been one of the best things for my consciousness.
I agree.
Thank you.
And it has also allowed me it's given me a compass that when my wife and I are aligned, most other things in my life are aligned.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Well, that actually goes into my next question. I wanted to ask, so in a relationship where you're both performers and you're both creative, you're raising a daughter, when you kind of have your boring Saturday night, and that's like, you really have a normal life when it comes down to many things, do you find that, like, raising a child in that environment, it's difficult to stay grounded, or are you just like, that's one part of my world and parenting is another?
No, I mean, look, I mean, it's, it's like, there's times where you want to get on with your work, and if you both work at home and there's kids running around, and where it's, there's logistical complications. But for us, we don't really, like I said, like, who you are morally, who you are as a parent, who you are as an artist, it's all got to go together.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you're not quite sure what you're going to get remembered for. I think like R. Kelly had hopes.
Oh God,
His music
rough
would
week
really
for him,
be what he's remembered for. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
No.
And so if you create a separation like that, you're really asking for trouble in terms of,
That's quite the comparison, Ben. No, well, I think that's relatable too. It's like always fascinating to me when I talk to musicians and people who we call like behind the velvet rope, famous. And they talk about like, oh, there's logistical issues to kids running around when we're working at home. Like that's like people who have a small home business and they're doing the same thing. It's very relatable and down to earth to talk in those terms.
Yeah.
So Ben, you say you're not into like pushing any certain dharma or certain kinds of belief systems and systems, yet you recently put out an album, songs about Islam, and I know you have a religious background to some extent, like you went to a Jewish private school and you've studied various religions and ceremonies and rituals. Like, do you have a current relationship with religion at all that you could share?
I think my appreciation of religions is almost like reading folk stories from different cultures.
Okay.
But it's almost like too dangerous because the human urge towards fanaticism is so extreme that I almost think religion, like, it's like, unless you can have a very, unless you really can think symbolically and like understand metaphor and stuff,
right?
Yeah.
Which maybe is like not taught as much anymore, like the poetry and everything. It's sort of dangerous territory to look at,
I know that's so, and it seems like this is treading on something you don't want to talk about, but is there something that sort of shifted with you that you were like, this like cult like following thing is just like dangerous? Like, was this something within yourself that you saw? Like, did you just have this like obsession towards something, or was this just like, this is growth for me that I just don't believe in that type of thing?
I think it's sort of like I repeatedly in my life submitted myself to different teachers and things.
Yeah.
And there came a clear point for me with each of them where I realized not only is the path they are showing me not going to get me where I want to go, but it's almost actively preventing me from getting where I want to go.
Right.
And I have come to feel that, like, it's very generous to say, well, when the student's ready, the master appears and you meet the right teacher at the time and then you're done with them. And whereas I kind of started to feel like there's actually something sinister about people who want to tell other people how to live.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're like slave owners. You know what I mean? It's like they're accumulating slaves psychically.
It's, and like they almost need the file. It's like you're giving them oxygen by being a follower.
Yeah. They're vampires. They trade in human experience. It's almost like rock stars who just want to have sex with their fans. It's like, that's like simple. You know what I mean? Or like a pyramid scheme where people just want to steal money. That's simple.
Right.
Building yourself up egoically through the worship of yourself by your contemporaries, because we're all each other's contemporaries, is a particularly perverse disorder.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're getting to the end. I want to hear a little bit about this tour and all of that. But first, I ask everyone a question. Can you tell me what the first thing you think of if I drop you into your childhood kitchen would be?
Wait, the first thing I think of?
Yeah.
Cork.
Cork?
Cork.
Yeah.
From where?
There was so much cork in that kitchen. Like, it felt like everything was covered in cork. Yeah.
Like the walls, the countertops.
And the floor, the kitchen table, it was like all cork.
It's really
it was like
funny.
living in a cork showroom.
Oh, man. Well, so tell us what's coming up next so we can brag about it a little bit.
Josh and I, Radnor and Lee, we're going out supporting Rachel Yamagata for a few shows in Chicago and Texas at the end of the month, and then we're about to make our second record. What else? Ione and I are going to be hosting an event at Largo, which is a theater here in LA. That's like a pre-Valentine's Day celebration on February 13th, which is going to be really fun with lots of comedians and musicians and stuff. And
that's fun.
I've got a musical people can listen to on streaming called Beers for Beer with like John Cryer and Busy Phillips and Rose Byrne, lots of good people. And just people can follow me on all my socials, Ben Lee Music, and keep up with it all.
That's awesome.
Awesome. It's been great, Ben. Thank you so much.
You guys.
We really appreciate it.
Okay, talk to you soon.
All right, cheers.
Oh, man. So Ben was...
That was awesome, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it was cool. It was like, I feel like he shifts and changes perspectives on and things with the wind a little bit.
You know, that was one of the more surprising yet intriguing parts of him. Like, I have to admit that I probably did like 3 or 4 hours of research on this one. That's just like how I am, and I wanted to feel like I kind of knew him a little bit before we went into the interview. And like some of his answers like really threw me off. Like I wasn't expecting a lot of the stuff he said,
which makes it that much more fun.
Yeah, which made it cooler. Like wow, I don't even know where to start. Like I feel like he went into that part with like the velvet rope, like wanting to be on the other side of it, even though he was already on that side of the velvet rope, like people like us.
Just knowing like the background of him, I mean, he's married to Ione Skye, who is just crazy famous. Like she was literally the girl in Say Anything, and her career since then has just continued on and on and on. And having him like say that he's still trying to earn his stripes to get
it was kind of like refreshing in a way, right? Like
yeah, it really was.
Like I feel like all of us are trying to keep up with the Joneses, and then you get on that side of the Joneses and you have a new set of Joneses to keep up with.
I know. Well, I think that was one of the big topics that we were like, oh, we totally know his stance on this because he's just totally made it. And he kind of was like,
even with like the money thing, like he said, yeah, of course I want more money. And I guess everyone does, but it is kind of like surprising and comforting to know that even people that are rich and famous and talented and on Billboard charts still are like, yeah, I want more money.
Yeah, everyone does,
more
right?
Fame
it's the ego, I think. Not just like Sarah Silverman was just interviewed on Dax's podcast, which we all know I love. And she was saying like, who the fuck needs $1 billion? Like, it's just our egos. Like,
I would love $1 billion.
Yeah, but she's like, you couldn't spend that in a lifetime. So it's like, what is the point?
Yeah.
But
think of all the great stuff you can do, though.
We always just strive for more and more.
Yeah.
I know. Well,
I'd like $1 billion.
I think like just like a couple million would be all right.
A few million would be awesome. But
yeah.
like, you know, if someone's like, here's $5 billion, I would do a lot of good stuff in the world. I think.
Yeah, but it's funny because there's like this parallel there. Like if you are doing what you love, cool. But like really, it would just be cool for someone to hand you $5 million. Like it's like doesn't really come down to like I want to be a billionaire by being a doula. Like I don't know. It's just like a funny balance.
I'll tell you one of the other parts that really this is one of the parts that totally threw me off is because I was watching Ben did this public talk. It was like a TED talk, but I think in like I don't know Australia or it was somewhere else. And one of his big things was talking about how he's entered all these different systems. And I tried to kind of pull that out of him. Like very unsuccessfully.
He's just totally changed his beliefs.
Yeah, like I asked him a question which I genuinely wanted to know the answer to because his speech he gave was amazing, and like I get where he was coming from. Like he answered me with like, well, that was Ben from like a year or two ago, and I admire that, you know, someone like that anyone would just change their views. Like if a politician does that, it's a flip flop, but like in reality, he's evolving, and we all have the right to do that. But he really threw me off because where I was coming from with the question was like I really genuinely wanted to know because like truthfully I've never done like ayahuasca trips, and like I haven't had a lot of the experiences he has with like studying, you know, the Tao Te Ching in like
well, wait,
New York.
So tell me what the crossover in your mind was from the ayahuasca chapter in his life to the systems.
Well, because in his talk he had said that he had like basically everything is a system. So we like grow up in like a community and that's a system, and then we have a religion if we were brought up with in such a way, and that's a system, and then we go to school and that's a system, and then you get into, let's say, playing guitar and that's a system. Like everything's
Right.
a system. So like in my view of him from listening to his talk and then just being a fan of his, he's like entered so many of those systems and has done so much self-work in like various realms of like meditation and yoga and like tripping balls on like acid or whatever else, and like those are very interesting to me, and I wanted to kind of find out what really he got from those, not in a way where he kind of went off on a little bit of not a rant, but he kind of said, well, like I didn't really get anything from those, and if anyone tells you that, here's what you have to try, that's what you shouldn't try. But
Right.
I get that, but I really wanted to be like, well, you know what? I tried this and I tried that. And here's a couple of really great things I got from it, just to point you in that direction.
Yeah, it sounded to me like possibly there was like some sort of like involvement in one of those areas, and to me maybe it comes back to like the oils or something that he was doing that was like super culty, which a lot of those things can come across that way. So if you're like involved in one of those, because I liked his vampire talk, I'm like a big believer
I did
in
too.
that.
What I really thought was interesting about him, which I definitely relate to, and you can probably validate this as part of me as well, but like he seems to have like equal parts of like overly deep, spiritually minded intellectualism and business savvy and like creative genius mixed in with like equal parts of like completely silly, laid back, fun lovingness, rock star dad, just chill vibes. Like depending on the video you watch with him or depending on what you read about him, he's either like this super fun, goofy guy or like extremely serious intellect, spiritually minded guru type of a guy.
Right. Well, like based on the information given to the world, right? And that was like
That
such a big
yeah,
topic
that
of
version
it. It's
Ben.
like, yeah, it's like we've chosen those pieces of ourselves to give the world, and then we don't know the pieces that get to stay home for his family and all of that, which I think is awesome to keep protected. It's like one of our big things too.
Absolutely.
I mean, this one was a big one. Just
all
to
this
learn.
aside, just to talk to Ben Lee was like awesome. Like the fact that he would
know.
like, give us the time of day was like very awesome. Like
I know, like for us, just full circle coming from like 12, 13 years ago, just like being such big fans in the audience and then having that persona and person open up about all these different parts of his life and where he's been for the past 12, 13 years was like one of those really cool, eye-opening, oh my God, he's done all these amazing collaborations. And like even just to throw his name in the mix with people like Lena Dunham and Zooey Deschanel and, people that I just adore and respect it's amazing. And then he wants to talk to us. Like, who the hell are we?
I think that goes to show like a lot of opportunities just come from asking, and like we've learned that lesson so many times over. But like the fact that he does take his spirituality and his craft serious enough to like give people like us an opportunity to hear how he thinks about things, that says a lot that he actually really truly cares about these topics. Otherwise he obviously has enough other things to do. So like so much gratitude for him doing that.
Yeah, no, this one was really, really fun. I mean, I don't know, I guess they're all fun in their own way, but when you get to talk to someone that, and I think the coolest part for me really is like his voice, just talking to him is like his singing voice. So it's like you like hear the album in front of you as he's talking, and you can almost hear as his ideas are formulating. It's like these ideas kind of coming into these thoughts that become songs, and you kind of almost hear the process like live and in person. So this was a good one. Yeah,
we hope you guys liked it. If there was anything that touched you guys in particular, we would love to hear on comments or on social media. But we really hope you guys loved it. It was like an honor for us to talk to Ben, and we hope you learned something and got some, I don't know, good little insights about life from the perspective of a rock star on another side of the velvet rope than we are, for sure.
Yeah, that's absolutely for sure. And we really do want feedback. So any comments you can give on the episode, if you want to add some comments on our social media, we would love to hear from you. I know Ben will see them. So if you want to reach out and just communicate with him, as with all of our interviewees, they always love just the messages through social media. So please reach out, chat with us. We'll get some talks going about some of these amazing topics. Otherwise,
yeah, that's about it.
That's a wrap.
Yeah, thanks for listening, and check us out next week.
Thanks, guys. We hope you loved that episode. If you did love it and could give us some love on iTunes, that would be amazing. You can leave a review, and we will give you a shout out at some point on this podcast.
Also, if you guys can follow us on social media, we would love to hear from you. We are on pretty much every social media platform at Shifting Perceptions Podcast, which is the same as our website, shiftingperceptionspodcast.com. We look and reply to all comments, so please share with your friends, tag us. We appreciate all the love.
And don't forget that all of our guests also see all these comments, so I'm sure if you want to just have a space you can reach out, these are the places to do it. We also want to give some love to our amazing photographer that has done all of our photos so far,
Kevin Rigby.
His website is wavelightstudio.com.
And also our really good friend John Harvey, who did the music for our podcast. You can find him at Instagram at Harvey Wallbanger. So that's our little rolling credits. We will be back next week.